Now, I'd like to introduce Erica Dean, Senior Director of Inclusion and Diversity, Northeast Division at Comcast. Erica is passionate about developing people strategies that support culture change and increase productivity, along with the overall effectiveness of operations. She has also been a member of United Way Women United since 2016 and co-chaired the 2017 Power of the Purse Luncheon and Silent Auction. Please welcome Erica Dean.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining. Hi, thank you. It's so good to see the faces that I can see and those that I can't. I'm appreciative that you're on as well. So I wasn't planning on sharing this, but I think about this topic, right? How do you engage employees during it or support your employees during a time of uncertainty and civil unrest? And I have to tell you, I'm going to share a personal experience with you that this role that I'm in, as Alyssa just described it, I took this role on 2 months ago, officially, end of February. Now, I've been an HR business partner, strategic partner for the last 5 years for our business, but I'd also been very deep into the diversity and inclusion work for Comcast. And now this role and opportunity came up right before COVID hit. And it's a great opportunity and where I have a ton of passion, but I'm very reflective right now of the timing of what's happening in the country and what we're all talking about like we will today. And it gives me a lot of energy and passion around making sure we're moving this work. So, I do want to go through just a couple of things that were on my mind to share, but I'm hoping we'll have enough time to even have a little dialogue around it. So, as I think about the topic, I am going to offer that for me, do a little looking at some of the content that I have. I'm operating at home off of 3 screens, so I'm sure most of you understand how that is. But I wanted to cover 5 tips that I've thought about when you think about employees during this time of uncertainty. And the first thing that I feel you need to concentrate on and do is make sure that you acknowledge the uncertainty. Acknowledge the uncertainty. So understanding your employee base may literally be concerned about what's happening in our country, what's happening in your organization, what may be happening to their jobs, and what does that mean for their jobs is an important thing. Don't carry on as business as usual, right? Or what we may refer to as the elephant in the room, right? Because I think what you risk is if you don't acknowledge that, discomfort sets in because you're not acknowledging. And then when employees don't feel comfortable at work and they're feeling uncertain about various things that are coming at us from the outside, you may unintentionally or inadvertently create more uncertainty. So these experiences and feelings that we're having, employees will be at various degrees. So ways that you can think about addressing that and acknowledging it would be having candid conversations. I know that's one thing that we're doing inside of our company right now is opening up a host of candid conversations with your teams. Embrace your employees of color. At this point in time, look to embrace your employees of color and create a safe space so that everyone feels they can be acknowledged and have a conversation. So be willing to talk about that, and be willing to talk about what's happening in the country. There's always a right framework inside of company atmosphere in which to do that, but find the right way to ask the questions, address it within the framework that's comfortable for your culture and how it's affecting people. So that would be my first tip, acknowledge that uncertainty. The second tip would be show compassion, and they should flow from one another. Show compassion. So think about the fact that employees could be losing sleep, not eating, trying to process what is happening. We're still in the midst of a COVID crisis, right? That did not go away, even though headlines shift all the time. But we essentially are dealing with COVID. And then we had another situation that's brought civil unrest to the conversation. And all of that's happening at the same time. And majority of us, if we're able to, unless we're essential workers, we've been working from home. So I think compassion is so key because we're all processing a lot of what we see around us. And that too adds to uncertainty. So I think about what can you help control, because now work is blending into home and home is blending into work for those of us that are working at home. There's not the same type of step away moment from the media as we may have had. Even if you were out in a work environment in a building, you might have some relief of what you're seeing or what you're taking in versus if you're at home. So I think about how do we show up as leaders and have compassion for our employees because of that and be willing to acknowledge that. And then thirdly, I would say ask people what they need. Now, this is a tough one, right? Because this is being comfortable with the uncomfortable. Are you really willing to ask what does somebody need and be ready to hear the answer? Right, that becomes the key. So I think, you know, as leaders, or even if you're not, if you're influencing, you know, in work, I think all of us leaders are a title, but we all can influence a conversation, have one-on-one discussions. Or if you're in a position where you need to talk to your leader and be willing to have a one-on-one discussion, do that. If you're a leader, make sure you're supporting having one-on-one discussions with your employees, because that's going to get what that person actually need. Feel encouraged to talk to them. Give some extra guidance on maybe they need some help around distractions, advice prioritizing, increased flexibility. What does that need? But again, you must be poised and ready to hear what they need so you can consider it. Maybe it works for your organization, maybe it doesn't. But the fact that you're acknowledging it and willing to have the conversation goes a long way in how you think about supporting an employee. So acknowledging the uncertainty, showing compassion in that, asking about what the person needs, leads me to the fourth point, or fourth tip would be model your self-care. How important is self-care for everything that we need to do? We need to do our best to take care of ourselves during this time and take care of our employees. Is that more sleep, finding tools, ways to get more sleep, nutrition opportunities, wellness, we would say, exercise? Are we as companies making sure that we're putting things out that will allow people to manage their self-care, whatever that may look like for them, but giving them the tools and resources and not shying away from that conversation? What does self-care look like? They're breathing exercises that people engage in that are helpful sometimes to people. So is it giving that permission to say on your lunch break, if you're able to take a walk, take a walk? And maybe you be the person that said, I've started walking during my lunch break, as long as that's possible. If you're in a situation where you can take a call and not need to be in front of a laptop and you get outside, that's healthy for you too. How many times have we, and I'm guilty of it as well, it's 2 o'clock before I know it and I haven't had lunch. That right there is, how do I manage self-care better to make sure that I'm just taking a moment to step away and now have lunch because I happen to be in my home environment currently. So I think that's really important. And as companies, we can support employees taking care of themselves. And the last thing I would say is encourage employees in action. What do I mean by that? If you're in an organization where you have the opportunity to be nimble and support the out the box thinking, but what are employees passionate about and how do they want to learn and thrive? I think some of the journey that we're on right now, when we look at what's happening around the country, and we'll say civil unrest, is educating ourselves around that in a way that's comfortable for us. How do we educate ourselves on what's happening? And I think that's, everybody has that lens, whether you're a person of color or whether you're a non-person of color. I think part of that becomes the journey. So do we encourage education internally and externally? Do you have employee resource groups where people can be a part of employee resource groups and have something that they're passionate about and able to talk about diversity and inclusion? You may or you may not, but there could be forums that you do that allow you to do that. Conversations around allyship, I think, are going to become more and more important in our future as we go forward in this discussion. So I would say make sure that you're giving opportunity for your employees, or if you are an employee, bring this up to your leaders about getting the education that you may want. What do you want to see that's going to help build in the discussion and make change? So I'll just kind of capture them again. I actually have a few tips. What I'm going to attempt to do is actually share my screen, because what I'd like to do is just some principles to remember as I summarize this. And so what I'll do is I'll ask one person to let me know if they can see my screen. Give me a moment. And again, because I'm using the work, you may see some work things pop up for me. I'll try to limit as possible. Can people see that?
Yes.
Yes.
Excellent. And so this is just kind of to summarize the tips that I was referring to. So some principles, do's and don'ts to remember: normalize the stress. It's a common physiological response to uncertainty. So that's the acknowledge the uncertainty. It's okay if people are feeling the way they're feeling. Show compassion, have the hard discussions, and show that you're there. Be willing to hear what people need and do your best to meet it. Encourage people to take care of themselves, get sleep, exercise, eat well. What do you need to help take care of yourself? And help people be involved in the journey they want to be on. Encourage them to learn, whether that's education internally, externally, being a part of a forum or something that is civically sound. Encourage that as well. Things not to do, I would say, just in summary, is neglect your employees' anxiety or concerns. Ignore people's emotions by not allowing them the space to express themselves in a way that would be healthy. And let uncertainty fester in any way. It creates an opposite reaction. And sometimes you know that in the short term, what that reaction is to. And other times you don't see that reaction, and then that's impacting your culture overall. So that's why I would say, don't let that fester. So what I'd like to do is, I thought of a few questions just given this topic, and I'm certainly open to if anyone else has questions, but I'd love just to have dialogue and look at these questions to maybe shape our dialogue. When you think about the tips that I just covered and this topic in general, do you think some of the tips I outlined are sustainable for the future? What may interfere with using these tips, excuse my typo, in the way that supports your organization? And what is the risk if you don't support and engage your employees during this time? Anybody have any thoughts around this or anything that's been said, or even if you want to share what you're doing inside of your organization?
Hi, this is Judy Barrett. I work for Travelers.
Jenny.
I think everything you brought up is just so appropriate. I actually had a call. We had a regional leadership call with our teams this morning, and a lot of these same topics came up, and it was really just a forum for leaders to talk about how they've been engaging with their peers and their employees, even people that maybe worked for them and now work in another department. And what resonated really, really well in the conversation was that everyone that has reached out, particularly to an African-American coworker, was just asking them what they need and how they are doing, just resonated so well from them. And I have to say, and I know there are several colleagues on this session as well with me, but just this came from the top, from our CEO, Alan Schnitzer. I think his message to all of us resonated it so well within the organization. But I also think that as regional leaders, we are doing everything we can to reach out, to listen, to have team discussions as well as individual discussions, like you said. And I do think that it's resonating really, really well with folks. I think they appreciate everything that senior leadership as well as local leadership is doing. But I also agree that it can't just stop with this one conversation. We have to continue it.
Absolutely. Great. Thank you for sharing that. Absolutely.
Erica, I can share a comment in the chat box.
Okay.
These are great and sustainable tips. If we do not support our employees, they will become disengaged with work, and we will potentially see productivity and results decline.
Thank you. I think that's a great comment. And that comes with part of that stress and that feeling of uncertainty. And if a person is overwhelmed with that, you do oftentimes see it affect productivity and results. And whether the person's aware that it's happening or not, sometimes we're not even aware that's happening, but oftentimes we see that as a part of something that we're feeling. So I think that's a really key point. So again, it's the matter of showing that compassion to have the conversation and we help navigate something that that person was aware of or maybe not aware of. Great point.
Hey, Erica.
Yes.
Hi, it's Jan Turner, also from Travelers. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your leadership, and thank you for doing this. And I would like to share that, you know, I think these tips are super practical. I think they're summarized really well. And I think one of the biggest observations that I've had from these last, 2+ weeks is the importance of awareness meets empathy meets action. And I think a lot of what you laid out parallels, a lot of that sort of thinking. And, I think many of us are hopeful that this is going to be a real turning point in our society that is going to have ripple effects that are sustained in our personal lives and in the halls of institutions and, governance and municipalities in the United States and beyond. And only time will tell. But I think your point about allyship is so important because we can't just be an ally for one event or one situation or one group. I think allyship is a mindset that has to be part of how we live and how we lead and can never stop.
Absolutely. And Jan, thank you. Yeah. Oh, go ahead. Jan, can you repeat what you said before with the where it meets? You had that succinctly, and I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, was it awareness, empathy, action?
Yes, that's it. Awareness meets empathy meets action.
And I don't want to take credit for that. Our company has been facilitating conversations around these issues with our Black African American Diversity Network, a series of conversations. I attended one a couple days ago. One of my colleagues shared that, and it resonated with me.
It does resonate. Thank you. And when you speak of allyship, and now there's even written material coming out to talk a little bit about allyship in that conversation. In my company, we're doing much of the same. We're having the Candid conversation, similar to Travelers, and I'm sure others that are represented on this call, this breakout call. And I had someone, as I was facilitating a conversation the other day, said, as we look at this as a human race discussion, and the point the individual was making, who was a Black American, was saying that, in order to change some of the dynamics and the laws that we have now, from that perspective, we needed to have someone that was a non-person of color or a white person say things needed to change and be an ally. In order for women to vote, at some point we needed men to say women have to have the right to vote. And then this person went on to say, even when we think about our LGBT community, we need others to say that we can't be insensitive if that's from the heterosexual community. So I think the point that the individual was making is how important allyship is, and it's more than one issue. I mean, I think the horrendous act that happened with George Floyd helped prompt this discussion today, but that is not the only discussion. Although it may have impacted the Black American community, that's not the only discussion. And so that's where this becomes about fighting for equality and injustice. So allyship is big, and all of us end up being an ally in one way or another.
Erica, Ojala Naeem here, also with Travelers. I love the principles that you shared. I think one thing that I hear a lot is, as an ally, what can I do to be more supportive? And I think one thing that we should try to ingrain into our day-to-days is really stepping back and making room to self-reflect on what is it that we do and how could that potentially affect people of color and people that are marginalized. And that's tough to do, right? Because then you could go down a spiral of questioning everything you're doing. And I don't think that's the intent, but really making time to reflect on your own actions in terms of what could I be doing better? You know, none of us are perfect and there's always room for improvement. And I think that's super important to build in. Listening is important to others, being an ally to others is important, but also thinking about our own actions is really critical.
Oh, that's powerful. Yes, thank you. And I think that self-reflections on all sides as well. Even though you're talking about allyship in that moment, it's all sides. I think all of our race, ethnicities, just being self-reflective of human beings, I think is huge. So thank you. Alyssa, I want to be cognizant of our time. Are there any other comments, or do we have time for one last comment or question?
There's nothing in the chat, but if anybody has one more question, then we'll head over to the Power of the Purse event that'll begin at 12:30.
Okay, sounds like no more questions. I really thank everyone for joining me. This was fun. I enjoyed it. These are conversations I'm so passionate about. So those other companies that are represented, travelers, I'm glad to hear everything you're doing, you know, to kind of move the conversation. It's great stuff. But please drop me an email if there's anything we didn't cover on this call or questions. I love the sharing, so really appreciate everyone's time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Erica.